Richard Sorge. Richard was a German spy who spent most of his time either drunk or seducing someone's wife. In fact, usually doing both at the same time. This guy was such a troll, but he just so happened to be a genius. Richard was born in 1895 in Russia, but he was raised in Germany. He was with the Nazi Party, but he was really just spying for the Soviet Union. His job was to get close to Japan's top officials and send every secret he could find back to Moscow. And he was so good at his job that he was able to join the German embassy in Tokyo. But he wasn't helping the Germans, and he was leaking everything to Stalin. In 1941, Richard sent one of the most important messages of the entire war, that Japan had no intention of attacking the Soviet Union. This allowed Stalin to move hundreds of thousands of troops from Siberia to fight the Germans near Moscow. And that move quite literally saved the Soviet capital during the war. But later that same year, Japanese police eventually caught on to him. They raided his home, found his radio equipment, and arrested him immediately. Despite all of the evidence against him, Richard refused to confess to his crimes, even after months of brutal torture. After 3 years in prison, the Japanese hanged him in 1944. He reportedly went to the gallows laughing, which perfectly sums up the kind of guy this guy was. Adolf Tolkachev. Despite having one of the worst names you could possibly be born with, Adolf Tolkachev was one of the good Adolfs, at least if you ask the US government. But Tolkachev wasn't supposed to be a spy. He spent his life working on radar systems inside a secret laboratory in the Soviet Union. He was a passionate engineer and a pretty quiet man. But in the late 1970s, he did something that nobody expected. Outside the American embassy in Moscow, he walked up to a US diplomat's car and slipped a small note onto the seat. The note simply read, "I have information. I want to help." When this note finally reached the States, the CIA thought it was almost definitely a trap. Nobody in the right mind would approach them so directly in the heart of the Soviet Union. But it wasn't a setup, and Tolkachev was serious about it. Over the next couple of years, he began passing the CIA secret documents, including thousands of pages about Soviet radar and weapons technology. He used microfilm hidden inside books, toothpaste tubes, and even sandwich wrappers, all to smuggle his secret messages into the US. His information was so valuable that it gave the US a major advantage in the Cold War, even saving billions of dollars in research and development. In 1985, though, a former CIA officer named Edward Lee Howard defected to the Soviet Union. Among the many secrets that he fed to the Soviet Union, one of them was Tolkachev's name. The next year, Tolkachev was arrested, beaten, and interrogated inside Moscow's infamous Lubyanka prison. The KGB demanded him to confess to his crimes on camera in order to send a message to the people. After refusing multiple times, he was subjected to a harsh interrogation, which is just a nicer way of the government saying that you're getting tortured. Unfortunately for him, a year later, Tolkachev was executed by a firing squad in Moscow. Alexander Litvinenko, the man who turned yellow. Alexander was a former Russian spy and officer of the FSB, which is a Russian agency that's in charge of national security and counterintelligence. Despite his high ranking though, he decided to flee Russia in late 2000 and defected to the UK, where he became an outspoken critic of the Russian government. Fast forward to 2006, and Alexander meets with two of his former colleagues at the Millennium Hotel in London. During their meeting, they drank tea while discussing whatever Russian people talk about, but after they all leave, Alexander begins to feel sick, like really sick. He started to experience nausea and vomiting, but the doctors simply wrote it off as food poisoning. But as the days went on, his symptoms started to get even more severe. He was finally admitted to the hospital, where his hair began to fall out, he became incredibly weak, and his skin started to turn yellow. After some medical tests, it was revealed that he had been poisoned with polonium-210. With no other explanation on how the hell he accidentally consumed a radioactive isotope, it became clear that his former colleagues had poisoned his tea in an assassination attempt. Right before his death on November 23rd, Alexander accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of ordering his assassination. This set off an investigation conducted by the British government, which concluded that it was almost definitely a state-sponsored assassination. The two colleagues he met up with previously were identified and charged with the murder. However, Russia denied any involvement whatsoever and refused to extradite the suspects. Alexander became the first confirmed victim of polonium-210 poisoning in history. A pretty unnerving way to go out, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the next spy. Oleg Penkovsky. Oleg was a colonel in Soviet military intelligence who was currently credited with preventing World War III, but he had a huge secret. He secretly hated the Soviet system and decided that he'd rather work for the enemy instead. So he contacted both the CIA and MI6 and essentially said whoever answers first gets a spy. For years, he gave the Americans top secret Soviet missile data. When the Cuban Missile Crisis hit in 1962, Penkovsky's data confirmed that the Soviets had nuclear missiles in Cuba, including how far the missiles could actually reach. This info single-handedly saved the US from nuclear war. However, the KGB eventually caught on. Oleg was arrested, interrogated, and put on trial for treason. He was eventually sentenced to death, and the Soviets made sure everyone knew about it. Officially, they said that he was shot by firing squad, but some reports claim that he was actually cremated alive. Nobody really knows what happened to him after he was caught, which makes his death even more scary. Either way, Oleg didn't die peacefully, but if it wasn't for him, World War III probably would have happened already. James Angleton. Angleton was one of the CIA's top counterintelligence officers, but this guy had some serious issues. He joined the CIA right after World War II and quickly became obsessed with finding Soviet spies inside the CIA. The problem was, he started finding moles everywhere. He accused friends, colleagues, and even his own mentors of being Soviet agents. And he wasn't subtle about it at all. He would randomly stop people in hallways and interrogate them mid-conversation. Under his watch, dozens of agents were fired or blacklisted for suspicious activity, and the CIA basically came to a halt because nobody trusted anyone anymore. By the 1970s, his paranoia got so bad that the CIA itself started spying on him. Eventually, they fired him too for turning the agency into a psychological horror movie. After his time in the CIA, he spent the rest of his life isolated, chain-smoking, and rambling on about Soviet conspiracies. Unlike the other spies in this video, he didn't even get caught. Because of his smoking addiction, he developed lung cancer and died in 1987. William Siebold. William was a German-born mechanic who moved to America for a quiet life. But in 1939, on a visit back to Germany, his old friends pulled him aside and recruited him to be a Nazi spy. But William wanted no part in this operation at all. So the moment he got back to the US, he walked straight to the FBI and told them exactly what happened during his visit. The FBI couldn't believe their luck. They immediately turned him into a double agent, gave him a fake office in New York, and wired the entire building with hidden microphones and cameras. This operation had the potential to catch dozens of Nazi spies in America, and that's exactly what happened. For the next 2 years, William ran one of the biggest sting operations in US history. Nazi spies came in and out of his office thinking they were trading secrets. Meanwhile, the FBI was recording every single word. By 1941, the operation had exposed 33 Nazi agents all across America, and William was hailed as a hero, but things weren't all sunshine and rainbows for him. After the war, he was given a fake name and later moved to California, constantly paranoid that someone was still after him. For years, he struggled with insomnia and was later diagnosed with manic depression. After years of suffering in the hospital, he died in 1970 due to a stress-related heart attack. Jan Masaryk. Jan was the foreign minister of Czechoslovakia, and he was trying to keep his country's independence after World War II. But when the communists took over in 1948, that goal quickly became impossible. Jan was one of the last officials that were not loyal to Moscow, and he openly critiqued the Soviet control of his government. But on the morning of March 10th, 1948, he was found dead, face down in the courtyard below his apartment. Because of his recent disagreement with the communists, his death immediately became suspicious. Officials claimed that his death was an accident because apparently he accidentally jumped out of the window while getting ready for bed. But almost nobody believed that story. His friends insisted that he was murdered by the communist regime, and later investigations found bruises and signs of struggle in his apartment prior to his death. To this day, his case is still officially unresolved, but everybody in Czechoslovakia knows what really happened that night. Walter Kravitsky. Walter was a part of the Soviet secret police in the 1930s. He was a high-ranking officer and had access to basically everything. But when Stalin started purging his own agents, he got scared and defected to the US. But he didn't stay quiet. He started warning everyone about Stalin's power and even wrote a book about Soviet espionage. Basically, he was the world's least secret ex-spy. By 1941, he was paranoid out of his mind. He warned his friends that if anything ever happened to him, there would be foul play involved. Just a few weeks later, a hotel maid at the Bellevue Hotel found his dead body in a room. There was a revolver in his hand and 3 bullet wounds in his head. Police immediately claimed that it was self-inflicted, but it seems pretty unlikely that he was able to shoot himself 3 times in the head. His friends were insistent that Stalin sent somebody to silence him. Even halfway across the world, Walter still wasn't safe from Stalin's regime. We are currently at 0 subscribers, so if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing.